Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the big time players that I'm watching into this season. Did kind of a Tommy Guys segment going into 2024, but let's jump into some of the most impactful freshmen in the conference contenders in the Big Ten. We did the SEC yesterday, so if you'd like to go check that out, you definitely can. But the Big Ten has two of the guys that I think are going to have the biggest impact on their teams this upcoming season, and it starts with that guy right there. Jeremiah Smith is a difference maker. This was an absolute layup for me because he was the biggest topic of conversation coming out of Columbus throughout spring practice. He was everything. He had pretty much unlimited amount of highlights from those practices and was compared to LeBron James in spring games. So yeah, it's going to be him being the most impactful freshman, that's for sure. I do think he's someone that is super, super important going into this season. And frankly, I can't remember a time I was quite as excited to see a non-quarterback freshman play football. I want to see this kid on the field so, so bad this upcoming season and as quickly as possible. And frankly, if Chip Kelly cares about the fans of college football at all, he'll throw a deep fade to this kid on the first play, just for fun, just to make everyone get a little bit excited and see what this kid can do with the ball in the air. But definitely very excited to see what he can do. I think it's fair to have a 2.5 over/under on the number of times that he makes his way onto the SportsCenter top 10 plays, because he's going to make some players look dumb this year. I can almost promise you that. He's just a remarkable player, and if he's like this as a freshman, I just can't imagine what he's going to be as a junior, but we'll get to there when we get there. Let's move right along to Oregon here, and Elijah Rushing is huge. The other guy here is Gatlin Berry, fantastic wide receiver, but not as worried about the wide receiver play. He might return punts as well, which could help this as well, but I do think edge rushing is going to be huge for this team this upcoming year. I do think Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele will be the starter. Will be the starters and will definitely do a very good job at those two positions, but I do think rotational rushers are hugely important for the elite teams across the country. You saw last year one of the guys at Georgia, Jalen Walker, coming in on some plays, the third down plays, just to get a sack. Those guys are huge, bar none. They're absolutely massive to your team's success if you want to be that elite team. And Elijah Rushing is a really good pass rusher, so I do think he's going to be someone that is going to be ready to play pretty much from day one. I think he was ready to play when he showed up on campus, but he's definitely someone I expect to get a ton of snaps and make some big plays for the Ducks this upcoming season. But let's move along to Penn State here, and I've talked about this guy a couple of times, but Luke Reynolds is huge for this team. He was a 5-star tight end they brought in, and he's one of those guys that you almost just need to hit almost right away because the pass catchers down in Penn State are not what they want them to be. Now, it's not necessarily a terrible group. I do think Harrison Wallace will be in for a really solid year. I think Caden Saunders can take a step forward. I do think Julian Fleming is a good player. I wouldn't necessarily have him as my wide receiver one, but that's where Penn State is at. I do think the tight ends will be huge. Tyler Warren is the one that will get a lot of the hype going into this season, but Luke Reynolds is just a pure pass catcher. He's a very, very good player and one of those guys that you're going to need pretty much immediately. You can use multiple tight end sets, whether it's 12 or 22 or whatever personnel you want to get into. Make sure you have those two tight ends on the field and allow them to kind of open doors, whether it's Tyler Warren, underneath and it's Luke Reynolds going over the middle on a seam route, whatever that looks like. You need this kid on the field because you just need as many elite pass catchers on the field as you possibly can get. So I think he's going to be hugely important and one of those guys that if we look back at a very successful season for Penn State, you're going to look back and see a number of receiving yards next to that guy's name. But let's move on, and same situation with Michigan. They need pass catchers. There's no two ways about that, and Marion Stewart is absolutely that guy. He can do that, and no question about it. And he's one of those guys that's really interesting to me because he brings something to Michigan's offense that I frankly think has just been missing a little bit. Now, Samaj Morgan is doing a great job of trying to bridge that gap, but this dude is outright speed. That is his thing. He absolutely flies on the football field, and I think it opens a ton of doors for them. They're going to run the ball a ton at Michigan. That's the way that they butter their bread. That's the way that they're going to go about business, but when you can get those really, really speedster guys, the guys that once the ball is in their hands, that's when the magic happens. It makes life so much easier on your quarterback, whether you're running a ton of drags or a ton of screens or quicks or whatever that looks like. The ability to just not throw the ball that far downfield and still get 35 yards because a guy is so dynamic with the ball in his hands, that is a huge, huge thing for a team. And I definitely expect him to be a huge player for this team this upcoming season because I do think they do have some really good players. I think Tyler Morris is in for a big-time year up there, but I am a little bit worried about the depth at that position and the ability to spread the ball out the way that they're going to need to. So I think he's going to make a pretty much immediate impact on this team, honestly. So cannot wait to watch him. And then we'll get into Marcellus Williams, a very, very talented player at USC. He's coming in at the cornerback position, and the USC defense is going to have a couple of freshmen that just need to take big snaps. So that's the reality of the position that they're in. They do have a relatively good front line for the most part, but the depth is just not very good, just plain and simple. They do have some guys coming off the edge that I think are going to be important this upcoming year in the freshman level, but when I look at that back end, I just have tons of questions. I do think that they brought in some really good players from the portal, but getting those guys to play together is not always the easiest thing in the world. And I do think that Marcellus Williams will absolutely get a ton of snaps at that cornerback position, and then it'll be really interesting to see what he can do with it, but because USC might just need him to ball out right away. I'll be totally honest. So it'll be really interesting to watch this kid. I think when you look at USC, there's tons of needs on the defensive side of the ball, and young guys are going to have to fill a lot of those voids. And then let's move on to Iowa, and I promise I'm not trying to make a joke about Iowa, but their punter is the most important player for this year. Reese Dakin is a very, very important player for them. And whenever a freshman comes in and takes over a position that is really, really important and can define multiple games, he's going to be this guy. So he's coming in to start, and field position is going to be huge. And especially for a team like Iowa that is going to be running the ball aggressively, that is going to be not quite as explosive as we've come accustomed to them being explosive, but the reality is I do think this is someone that could transform their season. It sounds, like I'm trying to poke fun at them. I'm not, but at the end of the day, I do think special teams, turnovers, how long you have the ball, time of possession are hugely important for this team because they're probably not going to win the explosivity battle. They're probably not going to win the talent battle, but they can win all the others. And this guy will have a ton to do with that, and it'll be interesting to see if he's someone that somehow wins them a game this upcoming season with some great punting, but it'll be fascinating to watch that. And then this is the easy one. Dylan Raiola going to Nebraska was the thing in this last recruiting cycle. He was as big of a deal as I've ever seen someone walking into a university because you're walking into a huge one, and you're walking into one of the biggest, most historic programs in the sport, and you got to save it, essentially. You are the savior of the program, and it's going to be incredible to watch this kid develop because there's so much on his shoulders. I can't even imagine what he's going through on a daily basis, but if he handles it well, this is a very capable team. Now, if he crumbles under that a little bit, it'll be very interesting to watch what happens with this team, but overall, there's no one at the freshman level that has more pressure, that has more energy, that is more important to their team than that guy right there, and it is not even close. I hate when people do that, but this one's not even close. I'll be totally honest. Wisconsin, Kevin Haywood is a huge offensive tackle for them, and this one's a little bit more interesting because there is a world where Haywood just doesn't take a snap this year, or at least a non-garbage time snap this year, and that does beg the question, why is he so important? And frankly, it's just because he could. There's so many important things for Wisconsin this upcoming year, but O-line depth is not necessarily something they love. I do think they do have 5 offensive linemen that'll be solid, but you need about 8 or 10 if you're going to be an elite team at this level, at this point in college football, and he's someone that might just have to jump in at right tackle or jump in at left tackle, and that would be huge for him. But regardless, whenever you have a big-time offensive lineman come in as a freshman and start, or even not even start, just be in the 2 deep and be someone that could be called on, he's going to be huge. It was the same reason why Kelvin Banks, when he came into Texas, was such a big deal. Will Campbell, when he came into LSU, same exact thing. You're going to need some guys that can come in and play right away, and if something goes wrong in that offensive line, this is going to be the guy they call on, and he might just have to play some huge snaps down the stretch for Wisconsin. And then finally, Washington. And I have Damon Williams Jr. here, the quarterback, and this is more me kind of projecting what I think Washington's going to be this year. And frankly, I think it's going to be two quarterbacks are going to start throughout the season. I think Will Rogers will start the season. I do not think he will end it. I really like Will Rogers. I think he's a fantastic player, and I do think that him and Jedd Fisch is a relatively good fit. I just don't think they're going to win enough games. And I think there's going to come a point in the season, whether it's 7 or 8 or 9 games in, where Jedd Fisch is going to start saying, maybe it's time to start getting ready for 2025. Obviously, that's not the greatest mentality, I suppose, but at the end of the day, if you can get a kid ready by putting him out on the field for the last couple of games or putting him out on the field earlier in the year if things aren't going well with Will Rogers, I think it's going to benefit you in the long run. So I think this is one that I am projecting a little bit that Will Rogers will not be the starting quarterback throughout the season, but at the end of the day, I do think this guy is hugely important this season, but also going forward in the next couple of seasons for Washington. This might be one of the most or the most defining player in what Jedd Fisch's Washington is going to look like going forward. So a ton of big-time guys in the Big Ten. There's no two ways about that. There are so many freshmen that are going to make waves. Jeremiah Smith and Dylan Raiola are the ones that everyone's going to be talking about. There's no two ways about that, but tons of other guys. There's no two way. There's so many guys that definitely are going to have a ton to say about this upcoming season and just cannot wait to watch it all unfold. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a hot take Thursday I have around being a blue blood and how much it actually means compared to how much people seem to think it means. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.